The wall of the enclosure is cold. Here, at the base of the Giza plateau, far from the summit where the Great Pyramid holds the sky, another kind of record is kept. It is not written in hieroglyphs, but in deep, vertical fissures running from the top of the limestone bedrock to the floor of the pit. They are channels, carved not by human hands, but by some other, more patient force. The official histories place us in the 4th dynasty, in the reign of the pharaoh Khafra, builder of the second pyramid. This is his precinct, and this is the rock from which the great Sphinx was born, a single monolithic body freed from the surrounding stone. One can run a hand along the edge of these fissures. The stone is not sharp, not fractured by mechanical stress or the clean cut of a quarrying tool. It is rounded, softened by a process that worked across the entire surface for an immense duration. The night air on the plateau is dry, carrying only fine dust. It is an atmosphere that preserves, that mummifies. But these walls do not speak of preservation. They speak of a relentless scouring, a story of abrasion and flow that feels alien to this desert landscape, a memory of a different climate held in the bedrock itself. The question these marks provoke is not complex. It is a simple, physical inquiry. Wind and sand over millennia create a different signature, horizontal undercutting, a polishing of the harder layers of stone. What is seen here, however, is the unmistakable profile of water. Not the slow flooding of the Nile, which would leave its own distinct marks, but the persistent runoff of heavy, driving rain, cascading down the face of the quarry wall year after year, century after century, carving its path into the living rock. Our records for the 4th dynasty are remarkably detailed. We have papyri from the era, like the Diary of Merer, which meticulously documents the transport of fine Tura limestone for the Great Pyramid's outer casing. We know the names of the work gangs, the schedules of the supply boats, the precise quantities of bread and beer distributed to the laborers. The world of Khafra and his father Khufu was a world of scribes, of administrators, of inventories. It was a civilization that measured, counted, and recorded its own immense undertakings with bureaucratic precision. Yet, geologists who have stood in this exact spot, shielded from the sun, have noted a profound chronological dissonance. The patterns of erosion etched into these walls are not consistent with the arid climate that has defined this region for the last 5,000 years. They are the signature of a pluvial period, a time of significant rainfall that predates the dynastic Egyptians by millennia. The stone itself seems to hold a memory of a much older world, a wetter world, whose timeline is difficult to reconcile with the established age of the monument it contains. The silence here is heavy with this contradiction. On one hand, the historical record, clear and dated. On the other, the geological record, equally clear, equally insistent. The two clocks do not run in sync. One measures the reigns of kings and the construction of tombs. The other measures the slow, indifferent passage of climatic ages. Here, in the enclosure of the Sphinx, these two forms of time are forced into the same space, and the friction between them is palpable. There are certain records that ask for stillness. To not lose the thread of this one, it is best to keep this archive close at hand. The evidence is not subtle. The erosion is not a faint suggestion, but a dominant architectural feature. In places, the fissures are several feet deep, creating an undulating, flowing profile across the entire western wall of the enclosure. This is not surface weathering. It is a fundamental reshaping of the landscape from which the Sphinx was carved. It suggests that the quarry pit itself is significantly older than the dynastic statue it cradles, that the Sphinx was sculpted from a piece of bedrock that had already endured an epoch of profound climatic change. We can imagine the scribes of Khafra, their palettes and brushes in hand, recording the movements of men and materials. They were masters of logistics, their world defined by the predictable cycles of the Nile, the authority of the pharaoh, and the gods of their pantheon. Their task was to document the present, to ensure the smooth functioning of a colossal state enterprise. Their focus was on the immediate, the practical, the administrative. The history of the stone itself, its deep geological past, was likely not a matter of their concern. And so, a silence begins to form. The very first question one might ask when looking at this place, what created these profound marks, is a question that appears nowhere in the ancient texts. There is no mention of unusual flooding, no reference to a time of great rains. The Egyptians recorded everything: royal decrees, tax levies, religious rituals, lists of provisions. But the most dramatic and defining feature of the enclosure that houses their most enigmatic monument goes entirely unmentioned. The stone speaks of an ancient deluge. The papyrus speaks only of an eternal desert. We can turn to the papyri, to the administrative heart of the Fourth Dynasty. The document known as the Diary of Merer, Inspector, offers a precise window into this world. It is a logbook, a functional record from the 27th year of Khufu's reign. Entry after entry details the transport of fine Tura limestone blocks down the Nile. The blocks are for the Great Pyramid's outer casing. The scribe notes the loading at the northern quarries, the 2-day journey to the Giza plateau, the delivery to the worksite. It is a record of immense logistical competence, written with the dry clarity of a shipping manifest. The document does not celebrate. It does not speak of gods or destiny. It simply accounts for the movement of material. The names of the boats are recorded. The schedules of the canal systems are noted. The world of Merer is one of timetables and quotas, of a vast bureaucratic apparatus functioning with predictable rhythm. The papyrus is a testament to the organizational power of the Old Kingdom state, a system capable of coordinating thousands of men across hundreds of miles for a single sustained purpose. The focus is on the final stages, the finishing, the application of the pyramid's brilliant white skin. From other sites, we have the ostraca, limestone flakes used for informal notes and tallies. Here, the names of the work gangs are preserved. The drunkards of Menkaura, the friends of Khufu. These were divisions of labor, teams of men identified by their loyalty to the pharaoh. The records track their attendance, their assignments, their place within the hierarchy of the project. The lists are repetitive, functional, designed to manage a human workforce on an unprecedented scale. They are the time cards of an ancient world, evidence of a society that cataloged its own human resources with the same diligence it applied to its stone. There is a weight to these records, the sheer accumulation of administrative detail. It paints a picture of a civilization obsessed with order, with measurement, with the act of accounting for its own existence. Every block, every man, every ration of bread and beer seems to have its place in a ledger. The papyrus and the ostraca together form a vast, interlocking archive of the mundane reality behind the monument. It is the paperwork of building a tomb for a god-king, and it is as thorough as any modern accounting system. Now we can leave the archive and enter the Valley Temple, adjacent to the Sphinx. The outer structure is faced with Aswan granite, the blocks smaller, fitted in a style characteristic of the Fourth Dynasty. Many are inscribed with the cartouches of Khafra, marking the building as his own. This is the familiar signature of dynastic Egypt, the clear and public claiming of a sacred space. The granite is hard, durable, but the construction is on a scale that aligns with other known works of the era. It is the official, sanctioned layer of the story, visible to all who approach. But beneath this granite skin lies a different architecture. The core of the temple is constructed from monolithic limestone blocks, some weighing upwards of 200 tons. These are not facing stones. They are the structural heart of the building. They are massive, cyclopean, and fitted together with a precision that defies the tools available to the Old Kingdom. There are no inscriptions on these core blocks, no cartouches, no hieroglyphs, no names of work gangs. They are utterly, profoundly anonymous. They speak of a different technological era, a different understanding of masonry. The silence of this inner core is a record in itself. It is a structural statement, a stark contrast to the inscribed granite that encases it. One phase of building is communicative, public, and royal. The other is silent, megalithic, and technically superior. They do not feel like the work of the same hands or the same minds. They feel like two distinct epochs of construction, one layered upon the other, separated by an unknown span of time. The temple is not a single creation. It is a document with two authors, written in two different languages of stone. We can look closer at the joints between these megalithic blocks. In many places, a knife blade cannot be inserted between them. The tolerance is less than 1/50th of an inch. This is not the work of pounding stones and copper chisels. It is a level of precision that requires a sophisticated understanding of geometry, logistics, and material science. It implies a method of quarrying, transporting, and setting multi-hundred-ton blocks that is not accounted for in any dynastic text. The masonry itself is a piece of data that contradicts the known technological profile of the era. The surface of these blocks is cold to the touch. It feels permanent, ancient beyond the scale of human dynasties. There is no ornamentation, nothing to distract from the sheer fact of their size and their perfect placement. To stand here is to be in the presence of a technology that left no written explanation of itself. Its only testament is the work itself, a silent, unadorned display of engineering prowess that seems to belong to a different timeline, a different chapter of human capability altogether. The contrast with the outer temple is not just a matter of style. It is a fundamental dissonance. We can turn to another record, the Palermo stone. It is a fragmented basalt stele, one of the primary sources for the history of the Old Kingdom. It lists the pharaohs from the first dynasty to the fifth. For each year of a king's reign, it records notable events, religious ceremonies, the creation of statues, military campaigns, and, crucially, the height of the annual Nile inundation. It is a year-by-year chronicle of the state's activities and concerns. It is a formal, royal record, designed to preserve the memory of the kings and their deeds for eternity. The Palermo stone is meticulous. It notes the biennial cattle count, a key economic event. It records the fashioning of a statue of the god Min. It details the construction of boats and the founding of temples. Yet, in all its detailed entries for the reigns of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaura, there is a profound omission. There is no mention of the initial survey of the Giza Plateau. There is no record of the design or engineering of the Great Pyramid. There is no entry for the quarrying and transport of the 3 million blocks that form its core. The greatest industrial projects of the ancient world are absent from their own official chronicles. Notice the silence in this archive, the specific hum of the air around you, the time on the clock. This moment is a coordinate, a point from which to observe the gaps in the record. It is a moment to be marked. Within the Great Pyramid itself, the records we do have are, again, logistical. We find quarry marks on the hidden faces of blocks, naming the work gangs. We have calculations for the amount of gypsum mortar needed to seal the joints. From other papyri, we know the types of copper tools supplied to the workers and the rate at which they were consumed and replaced. The civilization documented the maintenance of the project. It documented the final assembly. It documented the vast support system required to keep the workforce fed and equipped. But the foundational knowledge is missing. There is no surviving papyrus that shows the mathematical calculations required to align the structure to true north with such accuracy. There is no blueprint for the Grand Gallery with its complex corbelled vaulting. There is no engineering study for the King's Chamber, with its massive granite beams designed to relieve the immense pressure from the stone above. The scribes recorded the inventory of the tools, but not the knowledge that guided their use. The most intellectually demanding aspects of the project have left no paper trail. This absence is not trivial. It is the equivalent of finding a modern skyscraper's complete accounting ledgers, detailing every worker's salary, every shipment of concrete, every pane of glass, but finding no architectural drawings, no structural engineering plans, and no geological surveys. The practical, administrative layer is perfectly preserved. The core intellectual and engineering genesis, however, is a complete void. The silence from the scribes on this matter is absolute. We can widen our view to the plateau as a single integrated design. The three main pyramids are not placed randomly. Their diagonal alignment mirrors the three stars of Orion's belt, and their relative sizes reflect the star's brightness. This celestial correlation is precise. Furthermore, the entire complex is oriented to the cardinal points with an accuracy of within a few arc-minutes of true north. This was achieved without the aid of a magnetic compass, telescopes, or modern surveying equipment. It represents a masterful command of astronomy and geodesy. One can stand on the desert floor at night and see this geometry in motion. The stars turn overhead, and the stone below holds their pattern in a fixed, silent echo. This was not just a construction project. It was a terrestrial map of the cosmos. The knowledge required to achieve this level of astronomical alignment is of a different order than the knowledge required to manage a workforce. It is a sacred science, a wisdom that connects the earth to the heavens. And like the engineering plans, the texts describing this astronomical system are nowhere to be found. The final record for this act is the tool itself. The official list of available Egyptian stoneworking tools for the Fourth Dynasty is well established by archaeology. It consists of copper chisels and saws, which are relatively soft, and harder dolerite pounders. These are the instruments documented and unearthed. Now, place this inventory beside the material they were used to work. Millions of tons of limestone and hundreds of granite blocks, one of the hardest stones on Earth, quarried and shaped with minute precision. The record of the tools does not seem to match the reality of the artifact. We can now take these separate records, the eroded stone of the enclosure, the layered masonry of the temple, the meticulous but narrow accounts of the scribes, and place them side by side. The work is no longer one of excavation, but of comparison. An archaeologist does not only dig in the earth, they also search for resonance and dissonance within an archive, arranging the evidence on a table until a pattern begins to emerge from the noise. Here, in the quiet of this study, the fragments are brought into alignment, and the silence from one record is laid against the physical testimony of another. The first connection is immediate, a stark and unavoidable symmetry. The deep, vertical water erosion on the Sphinx enclosure walls speaks of a vast, unrecorded period of time. Beside it, we place the dynastic texts from the reign of Khafra, the supposed builder. In these texts, there is a corresponding void. No mention of a quarrying operation of this magnitude, no record of sculpting a monolithic creature from the bedrock. The physical evidence points to a deep past. The textual evidence is silent on that exact past. This is not simply a missing piece of a puzzle. It is a structural relationship. The anomaly in the stone is mirrored by an anomaly in the papyrus. Where the geology is most vocal, the historical record is most quiet. This suggests that the two records are not telling two different stories, but two parts of the same layered history. The scribes of the Fourth Dynasty were documenting their world, their work, their present. The stone, however, was preserving the memory of a world that had already passed. One can almost feel the presence of two different chronologies operating in the same physical space. One is the time of pharaohs, measured in dynasties and reigns, a human scale of ambition and construction. The other is the time of climate, of geology, measured in millennia of rainfall and the slow abrasion of bedrock. At Giza, these two timelines were forced to intersect, and the official history chose to record only its own, leaving the deeper, older story to be told by the stone itself. Now we bring the Valley Temple into this arrangement. The researchers' instruments confirm the data: an inner core of massive, anonymous, and precisely fitted limestone blocks, encased by a later, smaller, and clearly inscribed granite facade bearing Khafra's name. The architectural signature is one of duality, of one construction phase being enveloped by another. The technological sophistication is inverted. The older, inner core is superior in its engineering to the later, dynastic addition that claims the structure. This architectural layering perfectly echoes the relationship we observed at the Sphinx enclosure. Again, we see a silent, megalithic foundation. And again, we see a later, vocal, dynastic phase that re-signifies the original structure. The most challenging and impressive feat of engineering, the quarrying and placement of 200-ton blocks with hair-thin precision, is the very part of the story that goes unrecorded. The pattern is no longer an isolated incident. It is beginning to look like a methodology. The same hand does not appear to be at work. The mind that conceived of the silent, megalithic core seems to have operated with a different set of priorities and capabilities than the mind that later cased it in inscribed granite. One valued geometric precision and monolithic scale above all else, leaving no name. The other valued public declaration and royal legacy, ensuring the pharaoh's cartouche was visible to all. The temple is not one building. It is a dialogue between two eras. To continue observing this pattern as it unfolds is to share in a specific kind of watchfulness. Those who are drawn to these silent spaces often find they are not seeking a single answer, but the coherence of a larger question. Staying close to this archive is a way to hold that question in view. We now turn to the Great Pyramid itself, the centerpiece of the plateau. The data here is abundant, yet it follows the same bifurcated path. The archaeologist can catalog the logistical records. The Diary of Merer, detailing the transport of the final casing stones. The ostraca, naming the work gangs. The quarry marks, identifying the teams. These documents provide a clear picture of the project's final stages and its immense administrative apparatus. But when the inquiry shifts from logistics to genesis, the record falls silent once more. We place the known mathematical and astronomical achievements of the pyramid, its alignment to true north, its geometric constants, its celestial correlations, on the table. Beside them, we place the entire corpus of Old Kingdom papyri. There are no blueprints, no engineering calculations, no astronomical tables. The intellectual foundation of the greatest structure of the ancient world is a complete documentary void. The pattern is now consistent across all three major sites on the plateau. The Sphinx, the Valley Temple, and the Great Pyramid each present the same fundamental dichotomy. In each case, we have a well-documented phase of logistical management, labor organization, and final dynastic attribution. And in each case, this documented phase is applied to a foundational structure whose engineering, design, and origins are met with absolute, impenetrable silence. It is a signature written across an entire landscape. It is too consistent to be accidental, too systematic to be the result of randomly lost papyri. It feels deliberate, a reflection of the nature of the work being done. The evidence suggests the Fourth Dynasty pharaohs were not commissioning a project from scratch. They were undertaking a colossal project of completion, of restoration, of appropriation. They were finishing something. Let us re-examine the scribe, not as a historian, but as an administrator. His function was not to preserve the deep past, but to manage the immediate present. His world was one of ledgers, quotas, and timetables. The lists of bread and beer, the schedules for the canal boats, the inventories of copper chisels, these were his domain. He was the master of the project's metabolism, the intricate system that kept the great machine of labor running day after day. The precision of his records is what makes his omissions so significant. A culture that counts every loaf of bread but fails to mention the geometric principles behind its primary monument, is not a culture that is careless with its records. It is a culture that is recording exactly what it is doing, and no more. The scribe's silence is not a sign of ignorance, but a definition of scope. His task was to document the work of his time, the work of the pharaoh. From this perspective, the documentary void is not a void at all. It is a boundary. It is the line that separates the work of the Fourth Dynasty from the work that was already there. The scribes were not hiding a secret. They were simply doing their job. And their job, it seems, was to manage the final visible layer of a project whose foundations had been laid in a time beyond their own written memory. The researcher can now step back from the table. The individual pieces of evidence, a fissure in a wall, a joint between two blocks, a missing entry in a king list, are no longer isolated curiosities. They have been catalogued, compared, and aligned. They now form a single coherent signal that resonates across the entire Giza complex. The pattern is the discovery. It speaks of inheritance, of a monumental landscape received from a prior age, a silent legacy of stone that was too significant to ignore. The work of the dynastic Egyptians, then, becomes an act of engagement with this inheritance, clothing it, completing it, claiming it, and integrating it into their own cosmology. They wrote their chapter on top of a chapter that was already there, its ink long faded. The dust in this room seems to hold its breath. Outside, the plateau is a vast, silent diagram of this layered time. The question is no longer about a single anomaly, a single contradiction. It is now about the nature of this entire site, this architectural inheritance. The pattern is clear, but it does not resolve the mystery. It deepens it, giving it structure, and a scale that is difficult to comprehend. To move forward, we must now turn away from the stone and enter the archive in a different way. Not the archives of logistics and labor, but the formal state archives of chronology itself. The Egyptians were not only builders and administrators, they were custodians of time, keepers of king lists that sought to impose a seamless order on the past. These records, compiled by dynastic scribes for their pharaonic masters, were official documents, instruments of state power designed to legitimize the ruler by connecting him to a long, unbroken chain of sovereignty, stretching back to the origin of the world. One such document is the Turin King List. It is a papyrus, now in fragments, written in hieratic script during the reign of Ramesses II, long after the age of the pyramids. Yet it was a copy of a much older original, a comprehensive tally of every king believed to have ruled over Egypt. It is a stark, administrative text, organized into columns. One column for the name, another for the length of the reign, down to the exact number of years, months, and days. It is an accountant's ledger of royal succession, precise and dispassionate. For the most part, the list aligns with our established history. It names the pharaohs of the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms in their correct sequence. We see the names of Khufu and Khafre, their reigns noted with the same bureaucratic finality as any other entry. The document feels familiar, a confirmation of the known timeline, a testament to the scribes' meticulous preservation of their own history. It is a record that, on its surface, seems to reinforce the very narrative we have come to question, anchoring the great works of Giza firmly within the documented reigns of the Fourth Dynasty. But the list does not begin with the First Dynasty. Before the entry for Men's, the first human pharaoh who unified Upper and Lower Egypt, the scribe's accounting continues backward. The columns do not end. The timeline does not stop. It pushes deeper, into a period the scribes themselves designated as pre-dynastic. Here, the record moves from history into a different kind of chronology, one that is recorded with the same administrative rigor, but whose contents challenge our understanding of the Egyptian worldview. The list calmly and methodically documents kings who ruled before the pharaohs existed. The first of these pre-dynastic lines is a group of rulers the scribes call the Shemsu Hor, the followers of Horus. They are not listed as myths or symbolic figures. They are presented as a dynasty, a succession of sovereigns who held the kingship. The papyrus states that this line of rulers reigned for a period of 13,420 years. The number is written with the same clarity, the same lack of embellishment, as the 23-year reign assigned to Khufu. It is a piece of data entered into a royal spreadsheet, a formal accounting of a vast span of pre-pharaonic dominion. Their function, as implied by the list, was simply to rule, to maintain the continuity of kingship, to occupy the throne of Egypt in the long ages before the historical dynasties began. The record offers no narrative, no stories of their deeds. It provides only their title and the immense duration of their collective tenure. They are a functional entry in the state's memory, a placeholder for a period of time so vast that it dwarfs the entire span of recorded pharaonic civilization. Their presence in the official record is a quiet, administrative acknowledgement of a deep antiquity. One must pause here. The same scribal tradition that meticulously recorded the daily transport of stone for the pyramids also preserved this. A formal, state-sanctioned document that asserts, as a matter of official record, that a dynasty of kings ruled for over 13 millennia before the first pharaoh. This is not a poetic text or a religious myth in the conventional sense. It is a chronicle, an inventory of time, and its numbers suggest a historical scale that is difficult to place within our conventional frameworks. The Turin list pushes even further back. Before the Shemsu Hor, it records another line of rulers. These are named as the gods themselves: Ta, Ra, Geb, Osiris, Horus. But here, they are not treated as deities to be worshipped. They are entered into the list as kings, the very first to have ruled over the land. Each is assigned a reign of almost incomprehensible length, often spanning thousands of years individually. The scribe has simply slotted them into the chronology, their names and tenures recorded as the foundational entries in the long list of Egyptian sovereignty. The administrative nature of this record is what is most unsettling. The god Thoth is listed with a reign of 726 years. Horus is assigned 300. The scribe does not differentiate in his method. The impossible is catalogued with the same dispassionate hand as the historical. It is all part of a single, continuous account. This suggests that, for the ancient Egyptian state, the line between the divine and the historical was not a rupture, but a seamless transition recorded in the same administrative format. The function of these beings was to be the first administrators of the kingdom. This is not an isolated anomaly. The Palermo stone, though heavily fragmented, confirms this tradition. Its surviving pieces also list the names of pre-dynastic kings, figures who ruled before the unification of Egypt. Though we cannot read their reign lengths, their presence on this even older artifact, a royal annals from the 5th dynasty, shows that this belief in a deep, pre-pharaonic history was not a late invention. It was an integral part of the Old Kingdom's own conception of its past, a memory of a time of different rulers. What we are looking at is the Egyptian state's own internal model of time. It is a model that formally incorporates tens of thousands of years of organized rule before the era of Mens. This was not a fringe belief or a folktale. It was the official, state-sanctioned chronology. It was the historical software, so to speak, that the pharaonic civilization was running. The scribes who compiled these lists were not creating fiction. They were preserving a foundational record of their world. These figures, then, are the others, as they exist in the Egyptian record. Not as builders, not as aliens, but as predecessors, as the original holders of the office that the pharaohs would later inherit. Their function, according to the scribes, was to establish and maintain the order of the cosmos in the land of Egypt for an immense duration. They were the first government, the first administration, whose authority was so ancient that it was synonymous with the divine. The chronological implications are profound. If we take the scribes' own numbers as a record of their belief, the timeline for organized rule in the Nile Valley extends back by more than 36,000 years. This recorded timeline, preserved by the dynastic Egyptians, is far more in scale with the deep time suggested by the geological evidence of water erosion at the Sphinx enclosure. The two clocks that seemed so dissonant, the stone clock and the papyrus clock, suddenly begin to resonate if we look at the right papyrus. A new silence emerges from this alignment. The Giza scribes, focused on the 4th dynasty, make no mention of these preceding rulers, and the king lists, which so carefully preserve the memory of these ancient sovereigns, make no mention of their great works. The two primary archival streams of the Egyptian state run in parallel, never intersecting. The records of the immense foundational timeline are kept separate from the records of the monumental foundational structures. This reframes the entire question of inheritance. Perhaps what the 4th dynasty pharaohs inherited was not simply a set of abandoned buildings. Perhaps they inherited a territory, a sacred geography that had been under the dominion of these others for millennia. The function of the pre-dynastic kings was to rule the land. The structures at Giza, then, might not be tombs in our sense, but artifacts of that long-vanished administration, markers of a power and a timeline that the pharaohs acknowledged in their chronicles but did not disturb in their logistical records. We are left with the quiet rustle of a fragmented papyrus in a Turin museum. It is a document that is both a precise historical record and an account of an impossible past. The same mind that could calculate the needs of a workforce of thousands could also transcribe a history of gods and spirits who ruled for ages. The record does not resolve the contradiction. It simply holds it, a cold, bureaucratic testament to a timeline so deep that its origins are lost to us, but were, for a time, remembered by them. We return now to the earth itself. An archaeologist does not read only in papyrus. They read in the layers of soil and sand, the strata that form a timeline written in sediment. Each layer is a chapter, a period of settlement, a flood, a long abandonment. The discipline of stratigraphy is the grammar of this language. It assumes a sequence, a continuity, where one age rests upon the one that came before it, burying its tools, its hearths, its dead. This is the expected order of things, the steady accumulation of time made visible in the ground beneath our feet. At Giza, however, where the bedrock rises to meet the sky, this grammar is broken. When one searches for the archaeological layers that should connect the deep past to the dynastic present, a profound disruption is found. The stratum corresponding to the end of the last great pluvial period, the era of heavy rains that carved the Sphinx enclosure, is present, and the stratum corresponding to the Old Kingdom, with its workers' villages and pottery shards, is also present. But the layers that should exist between them, representing thousands of years of human activity, are often thin, sterile, or absent altogether. This is not a minor detail. It is a stratigraphic void, a missing chapter in the Earth's own record book. It is as if a hand reached down and wiped the slate clean before the first stone of the pyramids was laid. The continuity is severed. The deep wet past of the stone does not transition smoothly into the arid, dynastic present of the pharaohs. Instead, there is an interval, a great caesura in the land itself, a period of silence that is not textual, but geological. The very ground on which the monuments stand withholds the story of its own becoming. This period of silence has a name among some researchers. It is the Great Hiatus. It represents the span of time, perhaps several millennia, between the climate that weathered the Sphinx and the arrival of the civilization that claimed it. This should have been a time of immense cultural and technological evolution, the period in which the skills necessary for megalithic construction were slowly and painstakingly developed. We should find the evidence of this development scattered across the landscape of northern Egypt. We should find the remains of smaller experimental structures. We should find the quarries where early techniques were tested and refined. We should find the discarded tools that marked the slow transition from working with mud brick to mastering multi-ton blocks of limestone and granite. A project on the scale of Giza does not emerge from a vacuum. It requires a long and visible ancestry of trial and error, a lineage of engineering knowledge passed down and improved across generations. The evidence of this lineage should be unmistakable, but it is not there. The archaeological record of pre-dynastic Egypt shows a culture working with small stones, flint tools, and river clay. It is a sophisticated Neolithic culture, but it shows no hint of the geometric, astronomical, or logistical capabilities required to conceive of, let alone build, the Giza complex. The technological leap from the known pre-dynastic cultures to the engineering of the Great Pyramid is not a step. It is a chasm. The intermediate forms, the prototypes, the failed attempts, they are all missing. The silence, in this context, is not passive. It is an active contradiction. It suggests that the developmental history for the Giza core structures did not take place here. It is a technological tradition without a local origin story, a masterpiece without any preliminary sketches. The civilization of the Fourth Dynasty appears on the plateau as a fully formed entity, capable of managing a project of immense complexity, but the source of that foundational knowledge, the engineering genesis, is nowhere to be found in the preceding layers of their own land. This absence of a developmental sequence is perhaps the most profound silence of all. It is not a missing document that might one day be found in a jar. It is the missing evidence of an entire era of human effort, a void where there should be the accumulated debris of a long and arduous learning curve. The pattern of inheritance we saw in the architecture is mirrored here, in the timeline of technology itself. The knowledge seems to have been received, not created. One can feel the interval here. Mark it. The space between the last reign and the first pharaoh. The silence itself is the artifact. To stand on the plateau is to stand upon this clean break in time. The wind that moves across the sand today carries no memory of this transition. It only knows the long, slow work of abrasion, the patient erasing of sharp edges. The silence here is not empty. It is filled with the weight of this missing time, a presence defined by what is not recorded, what was not left behind. It hangs in the air between the eroded bedrock and the precisely placed granite blocks. We can look for another kind of record, the record of repair. An ancient structure exposed to the elements for millennia requires maintenance. If the core of Giza is as old as the erosion suggests, it would have been in a state of ruin by the time of the Fourth Dynasty. Later pharaohs, from the New Kingdom to the Ptolemaic period, and even into the Roman era, have left clear records of their restoration efforts, particularly on the Sphinx. Their work is easily identifiable. The repairs tell their own story. The blocks used by the New Kingdom restorers are smaller, the masonry cruder. They are patching the monument, not replicating its original construction. In the Roman period, the repairs become even more distinct, using brick and mortar in a style utterly alien to the monolithic core. These layers of repair are a testament to a continuous loss of knowledge. Each successive culture that came to Giza could admire the original work, but none could fully replicate it. The implication is stark. The technological capability that existed during the creation of the foundational structures was not passed down. It vanished. The silence, then, is not merely a gap in the historical record, but a gap in the transmission of knowledge itself. The pharaohs of the Fourth Dynasty may have inherited the structures, but it appears they did not inherit the full understanding of the methods used to create them. They were custodians of a legacy whose technical origins were already becoming obscure. This erases the simple narrative of a single, continuous culture. In its place is a more complex story of discontinuity, of a profound technological amnesia. The invisible antagonist, the relentless passage of time and the decay of memory, has left its mark not only in the missing papyri, but in the very stonework of the repairs. The inability of later, powerful civilizations to match the quality of the original work is a form of negative evidence, a silent admission that a high science had been lost. We are left with an architecture of ghosts. The original builders are gone, leaving no name. The knowledge they possessed is gone, leaving no manual. The developmental period that led to their mastery is gone, leaving no archaeological trace. All that remains is the work itself, and the profound, layered silence that surrounds it. This silence is not a void to be filled, but a landscape to be navigated. It forces us to reconsider the very nature of the evidence. We have been trained to look for what is present, for the artifact, the inscription, the text. But at Giza, the most powerful evidence may be what is absent. The sterile layer in the earth, the missing prototypes, the lost techniques. These are not failures of our search. They are the data. They are the signal. The antagonist is not a force of destruction, but of quiet, systematic removal. It has not torn the monuments down. It has carefully and completely excised their context, leaving them isolated in time, magnificent but inexplicable. The investigation cannot proceed by looking for more records of the Fourth Dynasty. To understand the foundation, we must now learn to read the language of its absence, to listen to the resonance of what is no longer there. The problem is no longer contained by the walls of the enclosure, nor by the joints of the temple blocks. It has escaped the archive. The patterns of evidence, the systematic layering, the technological discontinuity, the precise and corresponding silences no longer point to a simple secret about a single monument. They suggest a fundamental misalignment in our understanding of the timeline itself. The issue is not that a piece of the story is missing. It is that the entire story may be resting on a foundation that does not belong to it, a foundation whose existence requires a different model of the past. We are forced to consider that we are not looking at an anomaly within history, but at evidence of a history that runs parallel to our own, a deep current flowing beneath the visible stream of recorded time. The consistency of the pattern across Giza, the same signature of inheritance and appropriation repeated at every major structure, argues against a local secret. It argues for a global condition, a relationship between two distinct epochs of human endeavor, one of which has been almost entirely subsumed by the other. The silence we have been tracing is not the silence of a forgotten detail. It is the silence of a lost world. A world whose works were so enduring that they survived the cataclysm of its own disappearance, becoming the bedrock upon which a new civilization would, millennia later, build its own identity. The quiet in this room is now the sound of that immense, unrecorded interval. The king lists, with their impossible chronologies, can no longer be dismissed as mere myth-making. They begin to look like a different kind of record altogether. Not a history of events, but a memory of duration. The scribe who listed the reigns of gods and spirits for tens of thousands of years may not have been recording a literal succession of kings, but preserving an administrative echo of a vast timeline, a cultural memory of deep antiquity that had been passed down until its factual origins were lost, leaving only the scale, the numbers, and the names. Perhaps the Fourth Dynasty Egyptians were not the authors of a deception, but the inheritors of a profound amnesia. Their civilization may represent the first great effort to recover, to rebuild, and to re-sanctify a world that had been shattered. Their meticulous records of bread and beer are not a contradiction to the silence on engineering. They are a symptom of it. They could document what they could control, the human, logistical, and ritualistic effort of their own time. The rest was the work of the gods, the work of the ancestors, a science so far beyond their own that it could only be treated as sacred, not as a subject for technical manuals. This would mean that the power of the Old Kingdom was not the power of invention, but the power of organization. The ability to marshal the entirety of a society's resources and labor, not to create something new, but to maintain and complete something ancient. Giza, in this light, ceases to be a tomb complex and becomes a project of civilizational restoration. The pharaohs were not building their legacy from scratch. They were anchoring it to a legacy of immeasurable antiquity, writing their names onto the last accessible page of a much older book. The dust motes turn in the low light, each one a particle of a history that is now unstable. The air itself feels ancient, charged with the weight of this re-evaluation. We are no longer piecing together a timeline. We are watching one timeline dissolve to reveal another, deeper one beneath it. The concept of the others must now expand as well. They cease to be simply builders. They become a civilizational baseline, a prior iteration of high culture on this planet whose existence is now posited by the sheer impossibility of the alternative. Their function was not to leave a message, but simply to exist on a scale that left behind artifacts that could survive the end of their own world. The megalithic structures are not their communication, they are their debris. This reframes the entire human story. The narrative of slow, linear progress from primitive hunter-gatherers to the first dynastic states is interrupted by a data point that suggests a prior peak, a lost meridian of knowledge. Giza is not an early chapter in our known story, but may be a final chapter from an unknown one. The silence is the space between these two volumes, a testament to a profound historical discontinuity. The pharaohs, then, become figures of immense and tragic significance. They are not the proud originators of a tradition, but its first and most dedicated archaeologists. They found the ruins of a sacred science and dedicated their entire culture to preserving them, to clothing them in their own cosmology, to ensuring that the celestial alignments were maintained and the sacred ground was not abandoned. They were the first to stand where we stand now, in awe of a work they could not replicate and a history they could not fully recover. The implication is that our history is haunted, not by ghosts, but by the scale of a forgotten accomplishment. We are a civilization with a form of collective amnesia, living among the relics of a past so great that we have rationalized them as the work of primitive men with simple tools, because the alternative, that a high science existed and was lost, is too destabilizing to our sense of self. This investigation has never been about a single answer, but about the integrity of the question. To remain with this question is to accept a role in a much longer watch, one that spans generations. It is part of a larger archive, a deeper current. The wind outside the window seems to carry a different tone now. It is no longer just the sound of the desert, but the sound of an immense, empty space in our memory. The evidence does not point to a conspiracy, but to a catastrophe, a forgetting so complete that it left behind only stone and silence. Giza, then, is not a monument to the power of kings. It is a monument to the fragility of civilization. It is a geological and architectural marker of a rupture in the human timeline, a warning that knowledge is not a permanent acquisition, that entire worlds of understanding can be erased, leaving behind only puzzles that future ages will struggle to comprehend. The plateau becomes a kind of memorial. It memorializes not a person or an event, but an entire lost epoch of the human mind. The very bedrock, carved by ancient rains, serves as the first line of an epitaph whose text is now gone. The work that remains is to learn to read the shape of its absence. And so, the final implication settles. The mystery of Giza is not about who built the pyramids. It is about what was lost, and when, and how. The structures are not the mystery. They are the evidence of it. They are the quiet, permanent, and immovable proof that we do not know the full story of our own past. The night air on the plateau is thin and cold. Here, long after the last echo of the day has faded, the silence becomes a physical presence. It settles into the hollows of the rock, fills the empty spaces between the great stones, and presses down from a sky crowded with stars that do not seem to move. The wind is the only other presence, a low, constant whisper that has been speaking to this landscape for longer than any recorded language. It is a sound that does not interrupt the quiet, but defines it. We are left with the stones themselves. They are no longer evidence to be catalogued, no longer data points in an argument. In this light, under the slow wheel of the constellations, they are simply presences. The Great Pyramid is a shadow that has solidified, a mountain carved by a forgotten geometry. It does not offer up its secrets. It merely endures, its immense weight a testament to a purpose that now exists beyond the reach of memory. To be near it is to feel the scale of a thought that is no longer being thought. The Sphinx rests in its enclosure, a creature of the bedrock, gazing east. It has watched more sunrises than there are words in all the lost libraries of the world. The erosion that marks its body is not damage. It is a form of writing, the slow calligraphy of water and time. Its face, worn and impassive, holds the memory of a climate, of an epoch that has vanished from the world. It waits for a dawn that is the same as every dawn that has come before, a silent witness to a cycle that dwarfs the lifespan of empires. One can imagine the sand, moving grain by grain across the desert floor. It is a patient, restless sea. It covers and uncovers. In one century, it buries a temple entrance. In another, it reveals the corner of a wall that has not seen the sun for 1,000 years. This movement is the rhythm of the place, a slow and constant process of erasure and revelation. The desert does not keep secrets. It simply holds them in its own time, releasing them according to a logic that is not human. The question that brought us here has not been answered. It has only expanded, its edges dissolving into a much larger inquiry. It is no longer a question of dates and names, of who carved this stone or who wrote that papyrus. It has become a question about the nature of memory itself, what a civilization chooses to record, what it is forced to forget, and what endures in the earth when all records have turned to dust. The initial inquiry was a doorway, and it has opened into a vast, unlit room. The search is no longer for a hidden blueprint or a missing king list. That part of the work is done. What remains is a different kind of attention, a form of listening. To listen to the resonance between the precision of a joint in a granite wall and the vast undocumented silence that surrounds its creation. To recognize that the silence is not an empty space, but a defining feature of the object itself, as integral to its nature as the stone from which it is made. The structures themselves seem indifferent to our questions. They were not built to be understood by us. They were built to align with the stars, to withstand the passage of geological time, to hold a position on the surface of the planet. Their purpose was functional, a piece of an immense celestial machinery, and our attempts to read them as historical narratives may be a fundamental misunderstanding of their language. They are not telling a story. They are performing a function. The human figures of this history, the pharaoh, the scribe, the archaeologist, now seem like temporary custodians of a place that operates on a different timescale. Their lives, their ambitions, their meticulous records are a thin layer of activity on a surface that measures its age in millennia. They are part of the story, but they are not the whole story. They are the inheritors, the restorers, the keepers of a flame whose source was already lost in the darkness of a forgotten past. Slowly, the eastern horizon begins to soften. A line of pale gray light separates the sand from the sky. The brightest stars begin to fade, dissolving back into the coming blue. This is the moment of transition, the pause between the time of seeing the cosmos and the time of seeing the world. For a brief interval, the plateau is held in a perfect balance between night and day, between mystery and clarity. The air is still, holding its breath. The peaks of the three pyramids are the first to catch the light. They ignite, their capstones glowing a faint rose gold, while the desert floor remains in deep shadow. They greet the sun alone, as they have always done, solitary markers in a landscape that is slowly returning to visibility. The light descends their faces, revealing the texture of the blocks, the lines of the joints, the sheer, undeniable fact of their presence. They emerge from the darkness not as ruins, but as permanent fixtures of the dawn. Perhaps the purpose of this place was never to provide a final answer. Perhaps its function is to be a permanent question, an architectural anchor for our own sense of a lost past. It is here to remind us that our memory is short, that our records are incomplete, and that history is a far deeper and more fractured story than the one we tell ourselves. It is a monument not to a king, but to the immensity of what has been forgotten. The narrator's voice recedes. The act of guiding is over. What is left is the place itself, unburdened by interpretation. The low sound of the wind, the cool morning air, the vast, silent forms of the pyramids against a sky that is now bright and clear. There is nothing more to say. The evidence has been presented, the patterns observed. The rest is silence. The work of this archive is complete for now. The file is closed. The light in the room is turned off. But the object of the inquiry remains where it has always been, indifferent to our attention, holding its position in the sun. It does not need us to be real. It does not need our stories to have weight. It simply is. The Sphinx watches the sun climb higher into the sky. Its gaze is fixed, its purpose contained within itself. The shadows shorten. The heat begins to rise from the sand. A new day has begun on the plateau, indistinguishable from 10,000 days that have come before it. The vigil is over. The silence remains.